What's going on, Elevation Nation? We are back with another credible human being joining our awesome, thriving community. Jesse Johnson is a leadership coach, but also the founder of Supergivers and the host of Supergivers podcast. When I met Jesse a couple of weeks back, or I guess it's been a couple months now, I was so in awe of just his mission and how he is helping make a difference in our world. So we are so grateful, Jesse, to have you join us for a conversation and welcome you to Elevation Nation. So Jesse Johnson, welcome. How's it going, man?
It's going well. Yeah, it's Parker and Sam. It's an honor to be here. And it's a lot to live up to when you say credible guest. Like, I'm curious what makes a credible guest in your mind. But that's not something you have to answer. That's just where I'm.
You're already ahead of the ball game, Jesse. The fact that you have your own podcast and you have headphones on and a microphone, you're ahead of most folks. And so, not only are you doing incredible things, but you have an incredible setup. And that helps a lot when making a podcast. Yeah. Listen, we start small. But Jesse, no, like Parker said, I echo his sentiments. And obviously I only was able to hear through the grapevine of what Parker told me about yourself. But for Elevation Nation and everybody else out there who's listening, we ask all of our guests to start the podcast here for a quick elevator pitch. Who are you?
Wow. That's on the spot, huh? Okay, let's try it. Well, I'm a person who is a parent and a partner, first and foremost. I've recently, in the last few years, or maybe this lifetime, really come into a place of understanding that the way that I present myself to the world and the way that I engage with people is maybe the most important gift, if you want to go there, that I can offer. And I would say maybe more humbly a practice. And so I've really come through my 30s into my 40s from the very mission-based coaching world, which I'm sure you two know a little bit about, which has this like kind of externalized focus on purpose. And I'm coming into this place of feeling like, what if my purpose is to show up with kindness, with compassion, with receptivity, and openness to the world. That probably goes a little beyond an elevator pitch, or at least it's like a New York tall building elevator pitch.
I've been on some tall elevators or elevators that go up tall buildings. I think it was perfect, Jesse. I think
grace.
in caps. Yeah, I think it shows a little bit more into who you are. And, you're not really taught. You didn't even say really what you do. It's just that through what you were saying, especially in how you describe your purpose, shows a lot about who you are. Sam and I are on a mission every day to continue to figure out our own purpose. And by talking very vulnerably on our podcast or in our speaking or just one-on-one conversations with friends, family, or people we come across, we also want to help others find their purpose. And so with that, you said that your mission is based in the coaching world. Talk us more about how are you helping other people maybe find a new purpose, maybe find a purpose, or reconnect with that purpose that, they maybe even grew up with.
I think it really starts with the quality of our being. And I know it's going to sound really cliche, but let me kind of like help work on this with you. And I also want to ask you two, you mentioned before we started just this aspect of male mental health. And I think you two are probably like a generation younger than I am. So I think this could be really fun to go into because I work a lot with young men, and a lot of the leaders that I work with, I work with a lot of women, but a lot of men have been blessed enough to be put into leadership positions. And so I think purpose has this very masculine sort of layering to it traditionally that is an externalized concept. And I bought in wholeheartedly in some of my early access to the coaching world. And what I mean by that is like, I need to go create, 1,000 schools in Africa, or I need to go, support, digging clean water over here. And those things are awesome. And I'm really glad that people are doing them. And I found that the harder it was for me to create something like that, the more discouraged I got, around this concept of purpose. And I may aspire and accomplish some of those things at some point. But what I had to accept was that it is powerful the way that we show up in our own integrity. And so the coaching I do with the horses is largely about helping leadership groups and individuals come into what we would say is like a congruence with their own sense of value in relationship. So that's really the starting point for purpose for me.
Obviously, you hinted at the type of coaching, and we're going to get into horses in a bit because it's something obviously very unique to you. But I want to hit on purpose and get a little vulnerable here for a minute. Jesse, we've been doing this for over 5 years, 450 episodes. Parker and I have full-time jobs. I'm in therapy twice a week. I think I'm a pretty introspective guy. I have no idea what my purpose is still. And I think as of recently, I've come to grips and slowly started to accept that. As we go through life, especially for young overachievers, which are many of our listeners to this podcast, is they've been told their entire lives they're fantastic. Whether it's getting those good grades in high school or college, being involved in clubs and university, getting those high-paying internships and jobs, and they're told constantly, you're doing great. You're doing the right things. And then you become an adult and you go, what are those things? And it was that moment when, Parker and I got our jobs in Big Four consulting that I thought I was supposed to have felt like I made it. And I felt so much further from my end goal than I had ever been before. Before it was, Sam, come on, get through this semester with a 4.0 because that's going to get you an internship. And the internship is going to get you the job. And the job is going to get you the apartment. And then all of a sudden I had the job and the apartment and no one was telling me what was next. And truly, this podcast and this company that we've built is for us. It's for my soul because I need some outlet for me to find, I don't even know if I can call it a purpose, but an outlet right now.
An outlet for another part of you to express itself, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so. And sorry to turn this into a coaching session for me, but I jumped on the opportunity to learn from a great one here. I think so many young people, they think they need to find that one thing. Yeah. I had a buddy I was talking to over the weekend. He went through a breakup and he said, I need some time to figure out who I am. And I said, I think that's a great point, but who you are is going to change all the time. So I think what I've started to figure out now that Parker and I just turned 30, I just want the tools to figure out who I am, the tools to find my fulfillment and my purpose and my happiness. Because I don't know, maybe I have too much ADD to have one purpose my whole life.
Can I ask you something about that, Sam?
Please.
I think
yeah.
Just let's call this a discussion, right? Like a personal. What, if anything, has changed or evolved in you since following the impulse to start this versus that moment where you were, feeling the hollowness of the achievement block there?
Yeah. I mean, I think for the biggest piece, it's the confidence in my own skin and the comfortability I have with myself. I think before, as a young person, they don't teach us how to be vulnerable, how to be introspective, who I truly am at my core. It was all a performance act to try to get good grades and make teachers and coaches happy, right? And so I think it was that reset that I had to do, honestly, over a decade, 20 to 30, and still doing. That is my biggest accomplishment. And Elevation Nation and having conversations with such diverse human beings has given me not only an outlet, but almost like a quasi-mirror of looking at other humans and what they love and how they hold themselves to figure out who I actually am in my core.
That's so cool to hear. And I'm a few, and by a few, I mean many years older than you. And it's really cool to hear people at your stage, adopting awareness like that. I didn't have that kind of, I could have put it in different words probably, but I'm not sure I would have had the big picture view that you've got, the 29, 30, that kind of Saturn return stage, if you can go there. And I think that's part of the conditioning that we probably all got. And maybe this is part of the male thread is if you're like me, the male conditioning was hugely performative and achievement focused, like you're saying. And so I think part of the it's not that there's anything sort of like destructive about achievement in a vacuum, but that it can limit the way that we might see the world or relate to ourselves or relate to possibility. And so it sounds like there's a sense of like when I open myself to a different energy source or a different source of desire, like creating Elevation Nation for you, following certain things we might talk about for me. And I started writing a fiction novel when I was 43, just kind of like out of a dream and a little bit of intuition, and I'd never written that way before. And then not making a living off that. There's like no achievement. I think I've sold like 39 copies or something, but like I'm such a different person for having written that book and for continuing to write, just as an example. So it's inspiring to hear you at 30 being able to already find that part of yourself. I don't know if Parker, if you can relate.
I definitely can relate. Sam and I have had very similar experiences, but also very different experiences along this journey. And I think having this be a very much so constant in both of our lives through a lot of ambiguity and stress over the last 5 years, I think it's been really cool. I think if you like found a way to go back through all 450 conversations we've had, it's a journey of life. It's pretty beautiful, to your point. And I would love to write a book one day. Even I could care less if one person ever buys it. But the fact, to your point, is you can put your thoughts on paper in a place that you can go back to, or maybe your children can go back to, or family members. One thing came to mind for me, Jesse and Sam, that you got when you guys were talking. It was like outlets. Elevation Nation, it started as a podcast, was an outlet for Sam and myself. Jesse, for you talk about writing a book. Many people revert to outlets to get away from maybe a pain that they're feeling, a feeling of anxiety or honestly fear in whatever they're facing in their lives. And I'm reading this book on manlyhood right now. And it's talking about how young men in particular are reverting, they still reverting to outlets, but negative outlets, alcohol, drugs, porn. They sleep in their basement. They have no willingness or desire to get out into the world, maybe try to find a mate. And so we live at this time where the outlet's right in front of you. I mean, it's a phone, essentially. You could walk around and pick that thing up, and you could have that distraction at the snap of a finger. But my question for you is how are you coaching people to find that harder outlet, maybe that outlet that's going to take time, that you're not going to see a lot of gratification, maybe even up front with?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say much to the how, but I think I get the spirit of where you're going. It's sort of like the big question for our species. I think it's like, what do we need to hold on to in ourselves? What do we need to rediscover about ourselves that probably is already here, in the face of dealing with these things. And we're not reducing it to just like tech addiction, but I think that the phones, the screens, they can symbolize maybe some of this deeper hollowness that Sam was speaking to. And so I think when you ask about how, part of the job is simple, but not, simple is not easy, in bringing somebody into the access of themselves. How do we embody? And that could be even like, can I put my feet on the ground and feel sensations in my body? And for some people, I don't know you two at all, but for some people that's really challenging. Maybe it's easy for you. And if it's easy for you, then you have a lot of information. Because another part of, especially Western conditioning, and then certainly we've got the male thing over top of it, is we really kind of live up here, right? Like most of our value is in analytical intelligence and cognitive processes and executive functioning. And I would say we're phenomenal at those things as a species, but we're losing touch with all these other sources of wisdom. And so really helping people gain access to these sources. We are multidimensional beings that can access like crazy amounts of things. People have channeled incredible works of art, and have gained access to different realms to take it that far. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm just saying, can you be in your body, notice your breath, find sensations, find feelings and curiosity? When we talk about horses, that's a whole other relationship that helps mirror these things for people. But you don't need horses to be able to do that. You can do that right with each other. And I would suspect that's part of the inspiration that you two are talking about as well. But I think like with young men, and I'm curious to know your experience, my sense is I don't know that you all grew up with as much like encouragement and hope for your lives, or to see a path for, comfort and meaning and purpose. And, I don't know that you could speak to a comparison, but I wonder if you just have a sense of that in general for your peer group.
It's a great question. And I think it differs over like 5 years, right? I think kids 5 years younger than Parker and myself would have a very different answer than the kids 5 years older. But I think for us that are at 30, we grew up in this world, right? 2000s era where technology was becoming more popular. But you saw our parents, growing up in middle-class America, being very successful in their communities, being doctors, lawyers, whatever, right? And that was always almost the common path that you were supposed to take. And so you go off into university, you go to business school, you go to med school, whatever, and you think, all right, great, my parents could afford this nice house and this comfortable life or whatever it may be. I want to be better than them. And I think this generation is the first generation that has things pushing on them from two different sides. One, that's not the reality anymore.
Right.
I think for so many people, through whether it's AI or something else, those jobs are not paying as much. And so it's a different, scary path. I think what used to be considered a very safe career path is now, I think there's a lot of anxiety in young people. I joked with my dad the other day. I'm like, I'm jealous you're closer to retirement than I am. Like, I have no idea what the world's going to be like work-wise in the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm jealous. And so I think you have that pressure of you can't reach where you want to. And then I think you have this other pressure, hinting back to the phone, of comparison culture, where we had our parents that we were only comparing to and the people in our neighborhood. Now that reality's fake. But then you see these influencers and these people making gobs and gobs of money traveling the world, looking like they're so happy. So now you're comparing it to an even crazier standard. And so I think for so many young people, and I'll speak for young men who are in a mindset of, I need to provide for my families, I need to make my parents proud, I want to make more money than my mom and dad and have a slightly nicer house, and right, they now have this pressure of, oh my God, what do I do? Where do I go?
I think one more thing to add, Jesse, is I think we're at a time in modern American history where like people aren't trusting in the system as much as they used to be, because they're seeing that the system, to Sam's point, it was all a lie in a sense, that if you do that thing, you do this thing. Yep. And that's the way you should live a good life. The American dream portrayed good life. You go get a good job. You work for 40 years. You save for retirement. And it was ingrained in us as beings that our purpose, back to that point about purpose, becomes from a facade created by culture. And I think a lot of people nowadays are saying, wait, I don't like that, because I don't believe it true to who I am. And so to Sam's point, there's a lot of challenge with that, but I'm in the world of that also provides a lot of like excitement and freedom to think that I can choose to define that purpose and live by it, and know that, my life is not meant to just work and make money. There's so much more to that.
Yeah, as you're saying that, Parker, it's like amazing how these sort of like polarities tend to balance each other. It's like never before in history have things seemed so bleak and yet so possible. Never before has oppression been so intense and yet like liberation been so palpable. And a lot of that is choice. I feel like, and yes, I'm going to acknowledge like all the unearned ways that I benefit from to be able to even make that choice, because a lot of people are in social situations, economic situations, etc., that they don't even have the spiritual bandwidth to consider what I'm saying as a concept of choice. So that disclaimer aside, I do think that we're in a place in history where there is a collapse happening. And if we focus on the collapse, it looks like a complete disaster. Yet when things fall apart, disintegrate, if you will, then we get the chance to build something new. And I think there are elements of hope in that. At least that's what I choose to focus on. When I started writing my book, it was really 2019. It was like I was just feeling all this, extinction pressure of like, here I'm a dad, I have a 5-year-old, and I'm just starting to kind of realize that like humans are like, we're maybe the first species that we're aware of, at least, that is creating its own extinction. Like right before our eyes, we're wiping ourselves out, and it's hard to fathom the decisions we make and the priorities that we hold. And so I went, everybody's sort of reckoning with some version of this, and I sort of went into it through this story that I created, and I decided that even if that ends up being true, I'm not going to I don't want to collapse, in myself. And that, coming back to purpose, is a real choice to say, I'm going to embody the belief in beauty and love and impossibility. And it's not to bypass, you've probably interviewed some folks who can talk about spiritual bypass. And I think that's a real fine line. And especially in this era, it's really, really delicate to say like, well, it's, everything's falling apart, so it's just a beautiful opportunity to rebuild. That could be a bypass if we don't engage with our own responsibility. So I can appreciate what you're going through, and I think it's important to acknowledge for anybody listening, or anybody who's in your peer group, certainly, or any men who are like, I don't know how I fit into this thing at this point. It sounds like everybody hates me and I should be extinguished. That's the messaging. My son comes home from school. He's last year he's 10, and he's basically telling me like, yeah, it sounds like because I'm a boy that I'm bad, and I'm, this is like the 10-year-old
Wow.
filter on some of this, the collective messaging. And he has a wonderful school culture, and I trust the leadership there, and so I know the messaging is really loving. And even then, and he's a Waldorf student, I should add, so they are screen free. They're not on any of this stuff ever. And even him, he's coming in and being like, God, like I'm awful. It's and I think we need to acknowledge that is something we can't just shove aside as a culture. We can't just pitch men to the corner, even if, so much destruction and devastation has been caused by men and continues to be caused by men. We have to find some way to heal and invite people in, and it's not easy. Certainly not easy.
It's certainly not. And I don't know if any one person will solve it, but knowing that we, all three of us, the collective, we are doing our best to try to have these tougher, deeper, vulnerable conversations is important to me. And I think, again, whether you're a young man, young woman, older, whatever it may be listening to this, we're just trying to show that the next generation, this younger generation, is going through something right now. And it doesn't mean our problems are bigger than the older generation's issues that they're facing, but we're trying to figure it out. And I think that's what Parker and I have a goal of. And Jesse, I know with your mission of helping people find purpose, we've mentioned it a couple times, horses. Parker and I find our purpose and reconnect to our roots in nostalgia, certainly through nature. We volunteer at camp every year where we get to go back and be kids for a year at a grief camp. And that's when we get to get our feet in the dirt and get a little muddy and truly feel that sense of connection to the earth. And so talk to us a little bit about how you're using such beautiful and powerful animals to help with finding your purpose and becoming a better leader.
Yeah, well, I want to add too, it warms my heart to hear that you're doing that work. That sounds really rich and nourishing on a lot of levels. Yeah. And it's in the spirit of being in the dirt with animals, with different species, which might sound kind of esoteric or abstract, but let me bring that into the real. I believe that animals can be a source for our own like deconstructing supremacist kind of conditioning, because I've had to learn through my work with horses, and now I have this amazing dog that we adopted who's just taught me so much, that I do carry all this conditioning that I'm just innately like better, and that there's a hierarchical difference between us. And let's just say there may be some truth to that in terms of like, if my house is burning down and it's between my dog and my son, I'm sure as hell going to try to get both, but probably my son first. And so I have to kind of reconcile with that. But my work with the horses is an attempt to like really bring in congruence, like I said, but also develop empathy. And I really believe that empathy can be one of those medicines that humans can utilize, can infuse and express for all types of healing. So I work with groups, I work with individuals, and we create real relationship with horses. They're not objects of projection, which can happen, like, oh, the horse turned away from me, so like I'm not lovable. What we're doing is we're trying to actually create a real relationship and then see what we can learn about ourselves in that relationship. And we practice that respect, that mutual respect. And bring it back to what you mentioned even earlier around choice. The horses always have a choice to engage, and what it's like to really respect that. So I'm not sure if you're asking about that, but I can say less or more.
When we first met, I was fascinated, and I'll be completely frank, I didn't even know this type of work existed. But the way you explained it to me and the way you explain it now, it brought me back to a special moment in my life when I got to travel with Sam. And I mentioned a little bit to you about this, Jesse, when we met, is we traveled to Thailand and got to spend an entire day with elephants. And I went into that experience nervous, but also like, yeah, like elephants. I see elephants all the time, like they're playful, they're fun, they're large and whatever. And when we first arrived and we introduced ourselves to them, and we met a baby elephant and the mother, and I was in shock by, first of all, their brilliance, but also their welcoming of us and how gentle they were with us. And then we spent a whole day with them. We hiked with them, we bathed with them, we fed them, just like had a really enriching experience. And when you talked about the work that you're doing with these horses, it brought me to that moment. I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I was one of them and they were one of me, and we were on another, like, we obviously weren't communicating through voice, but we were communicating in so many different ways. And I live in New York City. I don't have an animal or a pet, and you don't see animals in the wilderness. And I think it's almost like, oh my God, what am I doing? I need to engage with more animals now, because you can learn so much from them.
It's wonderful. It makes me want to go to Thailand and do that elephant hike. That sounds amazing. The large herbivorous mammals, I think, hold a lot of untapped wisdom for us, in that they have survived thousands of years in social collectives, in the wild, like facing predators. And so they're part of this ecosystem, and their sensitivity, and horses are what, I have access to, but it's not just horses. In fact, Parker, there is a colleague of mine who has experimented with, like working with elephants in a preserve in South Africa. So I think there's probably we're scratching the surface on the type of intelligence that's out there. And I think these large mammals who live in herds, and this is something that I work with the horses, they have this like really, really rich social intelligence that we're just starting to learn about. That's in some ways really similar to ours, and then in some ways goes beyond.
I could go on and on about some of the facts that I learned about other animals, but whales in particular. I was just in Alaska, Jesse, and like their brilliance and how they communicate and the communal aspect blows my mind. But we might have to do a second podcast on that because I know. Go ahead. Did you have something to jump in?
Well, I wanted to ask you, was that orcas, killer whales?
It was orcas, and we saw humpbacks as well. And so we learned about both of them, and oh my gosh, incredible.
One of the, this is a whole other thing. I know we're not going to go too much longer, but there's something in the spirit of what we're talking about with humanity, that something that really humbled me in my work with horses is realizing that an appreciation for the apex predator, an appreciation for the rich, complex, sensitive, like balance that is an ecosystem. And so I ask about the orcas because I've actually, up on Vancouver Island, I've been able to see them. And that is obviously they're an apex predator animal, but they're one of the few apex predators that actually lives in groups. They live in families, right?
Yep.
Pods, I think they call them.
Pods.
Okay.
With their own hunting styles and pod to pod, different. Like it's wild.
It's humbling, isn't it?
It is. And I think to bring it full circle, Parker and I, like I said, we go to camp. That's where we get to be in touch with nature and nostalgia. Obviously, you're working with horses. I think, I hope, and I believe one of the many solutions or semi-cures out there for whatever the heck we want to call that we're facing, right? As a society, as young people with technology, young men, whatever, all of it. I think it's getting in touch with nature. Whether that is feeling like, when was the last time you actually felt grass on your feet and felt it? When was the last time you smelled the great outdoors? When was the last time you looked at a bird, at a deer, at a horse? And, Parker and I try to remind ourselves when we're getting stressed in the big cities to just take a moment. I mean, Parker consistently calls me when he's on walks, just trying to get fresh air in New York. And I think for this generation that now has grown up and been glued to their phones and technology, there is this awakening in our DNA as human beings that's saying, go back to your roots, go back to some semblance of nature and animals and just experience what it's like to be a human being again, not a cyborg.
And I feel for you both because I came from Portland. We lived in Portland up till 2020, and I didn't even know how much I was missing some of the elements that you just listed until I moved out into Central Oregon. Is like I've seen all those things. I see deer every day. I get to stand in the grass every day. I live 5 minutes from a river. I go and like dunk myself. I didn't even realize until I got out of the city. And Portland is a really like naturally robust city compared to some, right? Like compared to like DC, I'm sure, or something, and it's hard. So it's a whole other concept about like the glorification of urbanization. For people interested, I would recommend looking up an author of the 20th century named Wendell Berry. He's a really interesting guy and has a lot of wisdom to share, but so great that you're even holding on to that part of yourself despite living in, New York City and Washington, because I was losing it, and I could get out into the woods in Portland. Yeah, so that's amazing. Keep going back to camp.
You know what I like to say is like literally, you make it in New York and you make it out of New York, you can handle it like anything in some regard.
I couldn't survive. Yeah, I could. I grew up an hour from there, by the way, in rural Connecticut. Yeah. Okay. So I'm a Yankees fan. I grew up going to the city all the time, and I now in my late 40s, I can be in there for about a couple hours, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Too much stimulation.
Yeah, that's like my my co-host and best friend as well. He moved to a less vibrant city, but a beautiful place in DC. Jesse, now we're going to move to some rapid fire questions. It's just quick, hard hitting questions, and we want to hear your perspective. What's beautiful about New York City is they have the greatest museum in the entire world, the Museum of Natural History, the American Museum of Natural History. I'm a member. I've gone, I think, 15 times this year. I'm going next week with my wife. We go all the time because I think that is the best place for me to learn among, being in this crazy city. You can look backwards and learn not just about human history, but animal history and so much more. Space and gems and just like the earth. And so I'm curious, if you had a museum with any exhibit you could ever think of, like what would that exhibit be that you would create or want to go see?
I was just going to say, I took my son to the Natural History Museum 2 summers ago. It was awesome. It's what's coming to me is like some interactive exhibit where we get to witness and maybe even partake in going from like enemies to allies. And I'm not good enough in history to understand how that might be expressed, but that would be like a peace museum would be really amazing.
There's so many that's such a cool concept. There's so many cool concepts of new museums popping up. Parker, I love that question. I didn't know you were going to ask that. He went rogue on me. I just went to the American Dream Museum, all about the concept of the American dream and how that's evolved over the years. And that one was another interesting one. So I love that. A great answer, Jesse. So one of my favorite things about horses is they have fun names. Do you have a favorite name for a horse or one that has a special place in your heart?
Oh man, that's a good one. I'm so bad at horse names. I should have a better answer for this.
Like, do they have are they like dogs? Do you give them human names? Do they really have horse names? Do you go crazy like the race horses,
Yeah, totally. I think this is part of why I struggle with it because they make like these wild names, like Wheezing Charlie was a horse that my dad used to ride because he was like this old guy and he could go slow. And
he started as regular Charlie. It's just wear and tear on the body. And he's Wheezing Charlie.
I'll just share by way of kind of letting people in a little bit. There's this horse that I feel really close to in one of my partnerships is at a Mustang rescue outside of Portland, and wildhorsemountainranch.org in case people want to support. And the owner, Stacy, is just such a big, loving-hearted person. She took in this 16-year-old mare from the BLM. People, especially East Coast people, might not be aware that a big portion of the western United States is Bureau of Land Management terrain where all of our wild horse population lives. And there's several spots in Oregon. And my friend Stacy adopts certain horses who are rounded up by the government and if they're not adopted, there are worse fates that happen, as you can imagine. And so, she adopted this 16-year-old mare named Cayenne, which I don't think is like a great name or anything, but she just taught me a lot. And at one point I had the chance to actually adopt her and move her out here. And unfortunately I'm not quite set up for that yet, but, just a tough old girl who will not suffer any BS. And yet one time she had been really brutalized by men, especially because a lot of the BLM wranglers are male. And in the first few months when Stacy had her, I couldn't really get close to her. She would be pretty like standoffish or even slightly aggressive. And so we had this, I was like cleaning poop for basically, one day a week for a couple of years just to help out. And I'd just always go over and say hi and do my best. And then we got to the point where she actually would come in with clients with me. And when she came in with this client who was also a really powerful young woman, she turned on this whole other layer of power and personality. And it was super humbling. It was super humbling to see that a being has all these dimensions, and it's so easy to just look at an animal and say like that's what they are, but often it's because of how they are wary of us that they are the way they are. So just Cayenne really helps me remember how little I know about the world in the best of ways.
Man,
that was not a short, concise answer. I apologize.
Oh, longer elevator, all good. Um, I just the way you talk about it, it's like I said, I think it's Elevation Nation was in for a treat with this conversation. One last question for you, Jesse. We ask every single person who joins Elevation Nation, many people, not just 250 who have joined us on the podcast, but thousands around the globe in all of our workshops and keynotes that we've done, have something that binds us all together, and we call that your mental motto. It's a phrase, a quote, a slogan that you lead your life by. And so, Jesse Johnson, we're very curious. What is your mental motto?
Show, don't tell. And that's been recent. I've probably had 100 mantras, and they'll probably change. Show, don't tell is a really common phrase in the screenwriting fiction world, and it's simply about bringing an audience or a reader as far into the experience rather than like describing an experience. And it really pertains to me with parenting. You know, you can think of telling in a way of like if we're lecturing our kids or somebody's lecturing at us, it's like that really always helps me feel really distant from that person. And so my motto is to remind myself that I'm a living example for myself and for my son and for my wife and for my friends. And, you know, integrity is how we live, not what we talk about. So that's the show, don't tell reminder for me. I also want to put a plug in for another one. Is that all right? I almost put this down after I filled out your form. One of my favorite humans and speakers, philosophers, authors, Charles Eisenstein, has he had a quote, so to credit him, I don't know where he got it, but talking about the hopeful part that we mentioned earlier, the possibility mindset in a world that's just burning down. It has to happen somewhere before it can happen everywhere. And so to remind myself that like one small little singular way of being can create a spot from which things blossom. So that's my other one. Yeah, try to remind myself just on the smallness of things.
Two beautiful mental mottos, and show, don't tell. I know you could only tell us what you were doing today on the podcast with your words, Jesse, but we know that you are walking the walk as well, helping young men, young people, young and old, just find their purpose a little bit more, get in touch with nature. And I'm just very grateful that we got connected to you and we were able to have this vulnerable, introspective conversation amongst men in different generations. And I think that's a beautiful thing that doesn't happen often enough, learning from other generations. And so thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. And we are so honored to officially welcome you to Elevation Nation.
Yeah, Sam, I appreciate that. And Parker, it's an honor. And I would just add that I think this is showing, the way that you're showing up is like, this isn't fabricated. We're having a real relationship. And, Elevation Nation is certainly a platform that is embodying, a way of showing up and actually doing rather than just sort of hypothetical work. So I'm honored to have been a part of it.
We're honored to have you. And one day, hopefully soon, we can come out west and check out all the amazingness and jump into that river with you.
Come on in.
Go hang with some horses. Yeah, I mean,
special.
I've never been to Oregon. It's been on the bucket list for sure. And Sam, I know that's a top one for you too.
Anytime.
One day. All right, Elevation Nation. Until next week. Peace.